here is our finished clip, mostly finished clip, and here's our stock clip. Do you see like the difference between how much more powerful that image is with just a soft, deft hand so that nothing looks over-processed here, but it makes that final, if this was going to be the final image of your film, it just makes it so much more powerful than that. Last week we talked about videographers having their cameras on auto setting and how that can really go wrong indoors. This is the same framing as that video with all these settings on auto, and the reason they're on auto is because for the first time in months, I am mobile. We're going vlogging. Except that under no circumstances can I show you the interior of my house right now, or I will be actually murdered by my wife. What were you using this for?
For calling somebody.
Is that your phone?
No, it's a pretend phone.
Okay, Daddy's got to go pick up some footage. Hi! I made sure not to film anything in the house so that you wouldn't murder me. Oh.
Murder you for what?
It has been so long since we've vlogged. I don't even have my car set up anymore, so we're gonna have to do a little bit of work here. Actually, never mind, we can't time lapse it, I need this camera. Okay, let's see how this holds up. And it's gone. So, last week I cut out some of the nerdier aspects of my personality to what I thought was spare you guys from something you didn't want to hear. But then many of you let me know that that was not the case, that you would have in fact enjoyed hearing about that stuff. So, way back when we posted Safiya and Tyler's video, I had a video directly behind that planned where I was going to break down 3 of the very simple and easy but very impactful editing hacks that I did in post on their video. And what's very interesting about this, or unique, is we edit mainly in Final Cut Pro X, so I did it there in our version. Safiya and Tyler edit in Premiere Pro, and I actually went up to their place for 2 days, took 2 days, to color grade their film as well. So I got to utilize these in both Final Cut and Premiere, and can attest that they work essentially the same way in both Premiere and Final Cut Pro. So we're gonna go back. We are going to talk about those very simple editing hacks. This is way too long of an intro, but to do that, I need to stop at Taylor's house. Did I just pass it? I need to make a U-turn to stop at Taylor's house to get these drives. Also, if your grocery store is hipster enough, you might have some like lesser known LaCroix there, and I highly recommend this one. This is not a sponsored post. This LaCroix is cola flavored. So let's get back to my house. It is actually just about dinner time at the house, so I will need to break this vlog so that I can watch the kids while the wife makes dinner, because you know I don't want to run a brownie point deficit going into Friday evening.
I'm upside down.
Good night. Good night.
Can we get
It's off to bed. Okay, it is now many hours later, specifically about 11:15. After the kids went down, I spent about 2 hours trying to relink the project files in this project. And then I spent like another hour resetting up my setup in this room, because now the sunlight was down, so I needed to use my snazzy new ring light, get that all set up for the first time. And then I just recorded for about an hour, realizing afterwards that the screen recording never started on the take that I actually used. So without further ado, let us dive in. Okay, so the first clip we're gonna start on is actually the title card of this entire film. And my first tip is something that might not be super surprising to somebody that dabbles in filmmaking and color grading, but then again it might be. And that is using shape masks in your color grading to isolate certain areas of your image to color grade one way and then color grade another way outside of that mask. Now in Final Cut, the default for this is going to be circles or ovals, and you can kind of move the edges a little bit. From what I remember in Premiere, it was very similar, except that in Premiere you could very easily add or draw nodes and really create a much more custom shape, which I really liked. So I'll give that point to Premiere. But in this first image, now as you're watching this in the film, I'm going to go ahead and mute this, we don't need the sound, but as you're watching this in the film, this doesn't look like an image that has a shape mask over it for color grading. It has vignetting in it. So let's jump in and just look at this image. Where do you think the mask is drawn and the effect that it's having? I'm going to show you. I'm going to turn off the color in this image, the color grade in this image. Okay, so here is the raw image. As you can see, the raw image is a little bit underexposed. And so obviously I need to raise the exposure on that. So if I would have simply raised the exposure, that would have gotten me here, and that's fine. However, what I'm noticing is a couple of things. One, in this color grade, I cooled off the warmth because their skin tones, not only were they a little bit underexposed, their skin tones were just a teeny bit too warm, and that's just from all of these warm walls that were reflecting a warmer shadow back at them. It was like an unnaturally warm shadow. So I needed to cool off their skin tones a little bit, and then obviously I needed to raise the exposure, which made just kind of the whole image a little bit bright, and your eyes aren't drawn necessarily to the subject anymore. They're kind of drawn all around this area. And so by having this shape mask, that allows me to do two things. One, it allows me to make sure that you are staying focused where I want you to stay focused. It also allows me on the outside of the shape mask to leave the colors warm, so that even though I cooled off the colors inside, let me do it this way, even though I cooled the colors off inside where their skin tones are, where their faces are, I was able to leave it warm on the outside so that the image still feels really balanced. And that's a very subtle way that you can use a shape mask to create a color grade, much better than the raw, much better than a basic color grade, but a final color grade with a nice subtle shape mask. Now let me show you where that shape mask is and the bleed on it, or the feather, or the fall off, whatever you want to call it. So here's the initial circle just around their faces, and then you just want this fall off to be just wide enough that it's not noticeable, that you don't notice the vignetting anymore. And that's like my biggest key advice for vignetting. If I can see your vignetting, it's too much. Vignetting should be something subtle like this. It shouldn't be like, my whole film is vignetted. Can't you see my images are vignetted? If I can see, then you did it wrong. Okay, and then real quick, here's another example of using this shape mask, creating a vignette to draw your eyes where I want your eyes drawn, because here is the initial image. As you can see, the subject of the shot, the dress, is too dark. The windows are actually brighter than the dress, and it's a little bit brighter even out here. So as I initially raise the exposure on the dress, from this to this, I end up again with an image that's just kind of distracting. You don't really know what the subject of the image is, and you're watching this, you know, in the context of the film. Your eyes aren't right away going to be drawn where I want your eyes drawn. So this is a tool, a filmmaking tool, to help guide your audience to where you want them to look. And then the last example I will show you of this is a corrective one that also is going to involve two color levels, because what we had here was all of Carondelet House, the inside of it's very dark and very orange in its color. But what Safiya and Tyler did to combat that for their ceremony and their reception was they rented these awesome studio lights that you can see here. So this whole back area is much better exposed, it's much better lit. The one downside of these lights is that they were a different color than everything else in the space. So you had this very blue, relatively blue light behind, and then a much warmer light in front. And so in the initial shot, I basically had to average them out. So if you just look back here, this is too cool. This brick should not have any blue in it, and it does. And then obviously she is too warm. Her dress was white, not cream. So this is too warm. So what I did was I drew this shape mask, isolated it around her. Inside the shape mask, I raised her exposure, and then also, so here's my initial shot, I also cooled off inside while leaving the warmth on the outside. So that got me from here to here. Actually, I'll give you one more quick example. the biggest one that I had to work on both our film and their film was this random shot in here. So we have these two shots in this room. You can see the color of her skin tones here, and then the room right next door, right behind her there, you can see here kind of where we've color graded it. I think this was a pretty light color on this shot. Yeah, I just fixed some tint issue, pulled out some green. But then in here, now in the context of this film, this looks fine now, but let me show you where it started. That is where it started. That was the raw clip, I'm not even kidding you. Somehow, right where she was standing, there was some type of shadow combined with some like yellow or green light or light bouncing off like some yellow or green surface that just created a very dark, very like green yellow color hitting her skin. And so what I needed to do was isolate just her face, because the color out here is fine. I needed to isolate her face, and then I needed to match it to the rest of the scene. And luckily I did have two much cleaner shots of her face in basically the same light, what should have been the same light. And so this also is a perfect example. So now in the context of the film, it works. You never noticed it when you watched it the first time. But let's stop on it for a second, because this is a great example of when we talk about really getting it right in camera for video. This is not true for photo. In photo, you're shooting raw, so all of the information is there. You can change the exposure, you can change the white balance, you can change everything in post with photo as long as you're shooting raw. You cannot do that on video because of the way things are compressed. The way video compresses to be able to record so much data so quickly is to say that, hey, the stuff that you're not really using, like the very darkest dark grays and the very brightest almost whites, and then these colors that you're not using, this very subtle little amounts of blue or green or whatever colors you're not using it. So that's what I'm going to compress out so that I can preserve the quality of the rest of your image. So then as you go to change the white balance or change the exposure, if you have to change it more than just a couple percentage points in post, you are going to start to see some degradation in the quality of your footage. And we can use this as an example because I obviously had to do a lot of work on this one. So now, standing still on these shots, you can actually see the loss of definition in her face, the loss of smoothness and color in her face, like the color just kind of transitions weird. Whereas like here, we definitely have different colors hitting different parts of her face, but it's a much smoother transition. Whereas here, after all the work I did, it just doesn't quite roll correctly between the different skin tones. Tip number 2. This one is super simple. I'm just going to show you one example of this, but sometimes you'll have a subject that moves through two different light sources, two different colors, and you kind of have to pick, okay, am I going to color for this one or am I going to color for this one? Now, if you know what you're doing in a program like Final Cut or Premiere, you can drop keyframes in and have your color shift as the source shifts. But if that's blowing your mind right now, there's a much easier way you can do this. So let me go to a clip here. And my computer crashed once again, which means we lost the screen recording of the second half of these tips. So I will now be recording the second half of these tips for the third time. Okay, it appears to be recording. Let's see how long that lasts for. So the example that I showed you twice now, which I will show you for a third time, so that you can actually see the screen recording of it while I'm talking about it. In this clip, we have a little story within the story. So we have this moment where she takes a deep breath, which tells us so much about kind of where she's at in her headspace in this moment, just all those nerves of like, oh my God, I'm here, my wedding day, I'm in my wedding dress. And then she has this moment where she turns around, she kind of gives a nervous smile that continues on that feeling we see here. But then that smile turns much more genuine as she, you know, at the end of the day, like, she's here. Like, yes, she's nervous, but she's still like super excited. She's here. So it was this whole little story that I wanted to tell here. The problem is, I have my exposure set for this very bright light that's coming in through the window that you can see when she's looking at herself in the mirror. Once she turns around, sorry, let me mute that sound. Once she turns around, that's the brightness that she's at, which is essentially unusable. So I obviously need to brighten her up, but just when she turns around. So I used keyframes to do this, but when I was working on it later at their place, I just said, you know what, forget the keyframes. I'm just gonna splice this into two. I'll splice it right at where the midpoint of that transition is. I'll color grade the first clip for the first scene, the second clip for the second scene, and then I'll just crossfade the two. And I was able to blow through a lot of these clips that needed multiple color grades. I was able to blow through them a lot quicker. So let me show you how that would work here. So kind of right here in the middle of the turn, I'm gonna cut it in two. Okay, so now we're seeing the correct exposure for here and the correct exposure for here, and obviously that's just changing quickly. And then I'm just literally gonna drop a cross dissolve in, and you can obviously stretch this to make it fit. You can also, on Final Cut, you can grab right there to move it. And getting that same effect, super simple. Okay, and then the last tip, and this is my favorite. This is like such a subtle one, but it makes such a huge difference. Anytime you are trying to get a very clean, well-composed, like straight on shot where your vertical lines want vertical and your horizontal lines you want perfectly horizontal, a lot of times you're gonna miss, just a little bit. If you don't have your grid turned on, you're not on a tripod, whatever, you're gonna just miss a little bit, but we can fix that. Now, the easiest way to fix that, most of us know about that already, and that's going to be to simply rotate your image and then punch in. So we'll do that here. Let me undo. So here was the initial image here, and you can see like the rafters are just kind of a little bit off. So we are going to rotate, and then that leaves us with a little bit of like black background exposed in these corners here. And so then we're gonna just punch in enough to make that go away. Not everybody, a lot of people would know that already, but here's the next level of that. So in this clip, let's say we've already done that, we've already rotated, we've punched in, and now what we want to do, did I even have a keyframe on this? Wow, I even had a keyframe on this. I got really snazzy. What I'm going to do is play with the distort function. At least on Final Cut, it's called distort, and it's already in your inspector. On Premiere, I had to look this up. It's called corner pin, and it's an effect that you will actually need to look up in the effects and drop in, but it's gonna give you essentially the same thing as here. You're gonna see a little bit of different numbers to start. Don't worry, it's just where it's putting the zeros. Don't worry, it's gonna be the same principle. And you can see what I did on this clip, if I make it go away, was I took the bottom right corner, so that's this corner, and the y-axis, so up and down, and I pulled it down to fix a bit of a distortion issue. Because what I had here was I had the chairs, see these vertical lines from the chairs and the floor going up, but then here in the rafters, my vertical lines are going down. So no matter how I rotate this, I'm never gonna get these horizontal lines perfectly horizontal. So I'm gonna drag this down, and then I could even like rotate this a teeny bit more, drag it down a teeny bit more to get this just right. Whoops. And then the other thing I ended up doing in here too was it wasn't quite centered to start, so I punched in like a teeny bit more than I needed to. It's like 107, so that I could slide it a little bit to the right without exposing, you know, the edge of the frame there, to get it nice and centered. So here was the initial slider, just off kilter, a little bit too dark, and then here's our fixed slider. Initial, don't worry about how kind of grainy the bottom one is, it's just because it needs to render. Voila. So let me show you one final example of that, and we'll actually kind of do this clip live here. Okay, so here was the base clip that they used. I'm pretty sure it was like to close their films. End of the night, they're having their kind of like final kiss. So the first thing we're gonna wanna do is fix that exposure. So let's do this live real quick, kind of use two of these three tips in real time here. So I'm gonna raise this brightness up, and this is kind of hard to do because I have a ring light in my eye. But we're just gonna spitball it here. Yeah, see my scopes aren't very useful because behind them is pixels that are very much the same color as them, so I can't really pick out where their skin tones are in this versus the background. So we're just gonna eyeball this real quick. Okay, so we're gonna go like right there, and then like we've talked about before, the rest of the image is just too bright, so when you see this image, your eyes are gonna be drawn to these pillars and this arch, because that's the brightest spots in the image. So we're gonna add a shape mask around the color that we just did. We're gonna kind of shape it to their bodies. Like that, and then we're just going to grow this feather until it's big enough that we don't really notice it. Okay, and now we've fixed the color. We probably go a little bit more. Never be afraid. Don't, second guess yourself. You can always second guess yourself. Okay. Yep, that feels fine. Okay, now that the color's done, we can turn the last level of our LUT on. Okay, and then what I'm going to do to fix this is I'm going to go into the bottom of the image, and I'm going to just start pulling the bottom right down to straighten this out, okay? Now what you're seeing is I'm really just squishing the heck out of them. We'll fix that in a minute. I'm gonna go to the top right and pull it up a little bit to get those lines more fixed. Okay, because I'm looking at these lines and I'm looking down at these lines. So now the image feels pretty fixed. And then because I just squished the heck out of them, we'll go in the x-axis, also on the right side, and we'll just start stretching it out. So top right, x-axis. We'll stretch that, 100 pixels, but then we'll also do it to the bottom right, so that we're just pulling the whole thing over. Top right, let's do a little bit more to straighten that out a bit. That was too much. Yeah, right about there. And then the last thing we can do is try to center them up in the image. And then obviously I need to blow it up to get rid of the background. That also means now I can slide it up a teeny bit. And so we're left with this image. Don't worry about how it's blurry when I play it. It just needs to render from that image. You see how much we did to save that? I guess maybe they're still a teeny bit squished. Now, looking at it like A being it, I can see that they're still a little bit squished, so I might fix this a little bit more if I was really doing this for real. But let's go ahead and let that render. Okay, so now that it's rendered, here is our finished clip, mostly finished clip, and here's our stock clip. Do you see like the difference between how much more powerful that image is with just a soft, deft hand so that nothing looks over-processed here, but it makes that final, if this was gonna be the final image of your film, it just makes it so much more powerful than that. And that is the perfect example to end on this film, my first real instructional video on tips and tricks for editing. I really hope you guys enjoyed this. If you did, please smash that like button, share this video. I really enjoyed this topic. So I would love it if this video didn't end up like 10 out of 10 and just bomb like I'm afraid it's going to. So hey, share this video, hit that subscribe button, ring the notification bell, smash that like button, let me know what you like, let me know what you want to go over next. And yeah, I'll see you guys next week.